All right, hello.
Oh,
My name is Adrian, and these are the quarantine talks. Okay, first talk is with my buddy Jesse, and I met Jesse through my good friend Brandon, and they both met at Biola. And when Brandon told me about my friend Jesse, he was like, "Yeah, he's becoming Orthodox," and that's why I wanted to bring him on to talk about Orthodoxy, and especially coming from a Protestant university like Biola. So, Jesse, how are you?
good. Doing well. Just trying to stay afloat amidst this crazy times we're living in. Pretty
Yeah, dude. So,
strange.
are you working,
strange.
or how's
I'm
how's
not
that?
working. I'm
Okay.
not working currently.
What were you doing before this?
I've been looking for work for almost a year, and I was getting some bites at the beginning of this month. This month was looking good,
Mm-hmm.
and then the virus just hit, man, and it's just been
Yeah. Yeah, because
crazy.
I thought I had heard that you got hired at like a used car or like at Ford or something.
Hyundai,
Hyundai.
Hyundai,
Yeah. So what
Hyundai.
happened with that?
It just didn't work out. It was not for a plethora of different reasons. It just
Mm-hmm.
was not. Actually, the other guy who got hired with me quit 2 days after me, and he had experience in that field,
Mm-hmm.
and he just was not. He said it was the worst job you ever worked.
Ooh,
So
okay.
this was before the virus and everything. This is like early March, and I've just been helping my dad out. We're actually building an addition for my grandmother.
Oh, that's nice.
So I'm helping him out. I'm getting paid for that, thankfully. So I'm making a little bit of money, but yeah,
Mm.
it's been tough, man.
Yeah, because when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's a strange way to like use a philosophy degree.
to, hey, buy a car.
Yeah. Why do you want a car?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. But no, I'd imagine a philosophy degree is good for like overcoming objections as a
Sure,
salesman. Yeah.
sure.
So where did you get your degree?
I got my degree at Biola. Well, my master's degree. If you want to go back to the bachelor's level, I did my bachelor's. Well, I did community college at College of the Canyons in Santa Clarita,
Ooh.
right near the Magic Mountain area.
Yeah, yeah, I know where it's at. Yeah.
And then I moved to Bakersfield and completed the bachelor's at Cal State Bakersfield. So my grades weren't that great in the bachelor level, but when I went to the master's level at Biola
Hmm.
in La Mirada, it was definitely a step up because you're doing more of the things you want to do. You know what I mean? You're not
Yeah.
taking general ed requirements anymore. You're not taking classes that seem meaningless. You're
Yeah.
taking philosophy, right? You're taking theology. It was an integrative program with hermeneutics and survey classes and stuff like that.
Oh
So
wow. So even
um,
at the grad level, you were taking hermeneutics for a
sure.
philosophy degree?
Yes. Yeah, so it was 30 units of philosophy. Actually, I think a little bit more than that actually when I think about it.
Mhm.
Then it was 3 units hermeneutics, 9 units theology. For me, because I did come from a Christian school, I had to take 2 survey classes, which are Old Testament and New Testament. And then I'm trying to remember spiritual formation, which is like about I'm not really sure. Still,
Yeah.
I think that class was a lot about how to talk to people,
Mm.
how to commiserate with people, how to be approachable, um, the
Yeah.
practical side
You're
of
very
Christianity.
approachable, so I think you got your
Right.
money's worth on that. So how did you choose Biola after all that?
Right. So okay, that's a really good question. So in 2008, I think 2008, 2009, the new atheism was rising.
Oh yeah.
And
Well, a little
at this
before that, because I think they really got a lot of like footwork
right,
after 9/11.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because after 9/11, well, shortly after 9/11, I think there was a short spike in
Hmm.
belief in God. But I
Hmm.
think people started to realize like the Iraq war is happening. There's all this evil in the world.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who claim to be ambassadors for God that are killing people.
Mm.
And there was a lot of authors like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett
Hmm.
specifically, who took advantage of that. I think around 2005 is when they started writing, and then around 2007, 2008 is when they
Oh yeah.
um, started to be prolific, right?
Oh yeah.
So I was already a Christian at that. I already identified as a Christian by that point. And I remember having a lot of conversations over atheism and stuff like this. And I remember there was a philosopher named William Lane Craig,
Oh yeah. Bill Craig.
um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
who debated Christopher Hitchens at Biola, right? And
Yep.
at this point, I had no idea who he was or anything.
You
So
didn't
I
know who
remember
Bill Craig was, or you didn't know who like Hitchens was?
I did not know who Bill Craig was.
Okay.
So I looked him up. I looked up an old debate with Anthony Flew, right? Anthony Flew was the Dawkins before Dawkins, right? He
Yeah,
was
yeah.
the
I've seen that debate, and that's where like Bill Craig still has his beard. Yeah.
he does still have his beard,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's magnificent.
very. Um, but I remember, wow, I'm like, this guy can debate. This guy knows what he's doing.
Oh yeah.
Like
Oh
he
yeah.
goes through the arguments for God and everything. And so I was like, wow, okay, let's I'm now we're gonna watch the actual Hitchens debate. So I remember watching Hitchens debate and just being like, this
Oh yeah.
is this is great. This is fantastic.
Yeah. He
So
absolutely. Yeah. Craig absolutely demolished him.
yeah, it was great. So um, from that point, I chose philosophy as my degree. So I had four schools to choose from. So I chose it was going to be LMU, Loyola Marymount, San Diego State University, Cal State Long Beach,
Woo.
and Biola. So those are the four schools, right? So um, I got accepted in all four, thankfully, which is pretty
Wow.
cool. Yeah, I mean it
Now,
was actually
real quick,
yeah,
who's at LMU? Is it just Kaiser? Is Kaiser at LMU?
he is.
Okay, cool.
Also,
That's
Eric Pearl is at LMU.
mhm.
He's a Neoplatonic scholar, um, and I believe I can't remember. There's another gentleman, Daniel Speak, who actually I knew of him because my teacher from at Cal State Bakersfield was actually friends. They actually taught at I believe Pasadena City College
Mhm.
together way back in the day.
Yeah. And you know
Dan
who teaches
Speak,
at Pasadena City College now?
Mr. Phaser,
Mr.
Mr.
Fazer.
Dr.
Yeah.
Phaser.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. Um, so I looked at LMU. It ultimately didn't fit with me because they're a lot more continental in their approach.
Hmm.
Um, and for some other political reasons, it didn't fit.
I understand.
But
I understand. I
yeah.
understand. it's
um,
it's a Catholic university. I'm a Catholic. I understand.
well, it's a Jesuit university too, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's a,
Right, right.
so
It's not a Catholic university. It's a Jesuit university.
exactly. So
Why did you want to go to Cal State Long Beach? Because that's where I'm at. So cool.
Cal State Long Beach really attracted me because they have a great philosophy of mind program.
Oh,
Um,
okay. I know who you're talking about. Yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
have some great, if I remember correctly, and I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but they have some great philosophers of mind there.
Hmm.
And they have a really good placement record into PhDs.
Yes, they do.
Um, so I chose Biola at the end of the day because of obviously the Christian element was a huge um, feature, and I think too just having that history, from 2009 onward
Hmm.
till 2016 is when I got accepted. I think that motivated me more in that direction. And just being near Orange County, I think was kind of cool. And JP Moreland too was a huge influence on me too,
Hmm.
with Craig and Doug Givett as well. I appreciate everything I learned there. So yeah, I guess that's a long way of answering your question of why I chose Biola. I think also too to have that sort of theology backdrop. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because I asked one of the administrators when I was asking him, I got accepted in LMU. LMU was actually the first one I got accepted into. Um, Actually, I think I got accepted to it in April. I think it was exactly around this time, in March, April, um, but in 2016. So I asked one of the administrators at Biola, why should I pick Biola? And he said something like, you know, having the integrative, theology, philosophy at the same time
Hmm.
gives you a more holistic perspective, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just doing philosophy for philosophy, right? it's doing philosophy in a way that it's situated in a broader theological context.
Hmm.
And I was like, that's a good reason.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I chose Biola. I think that was one of the reasons.
Yeah, no, I totally feel you on that because, like, even I mean, I'm
Yeah,
going through my undergrad now, and none of my classes are really Christian friendly. Um, and I mean, so like right now, I'm taking like this sexual metaphysics, and it's just there's nothing, there's no place for Christ in there
sure.
whatsoever, and it's just like you take a metaphysics class, you take an ethics class, you take an epistemology class, and they're all like, it's just a bit here, a bit there, and you have
Sure.
to kind of figure out how they all fit together on your own. And I think a lot of people, they don't have like that backdrop where they, it's like how to make a coherent whole of everything. And so you have like these crazy contradictions in people, and they're just like all over the place.
Right.
When you're an undergrad, sometimes like the more edgy beliefs, are more attractive.
Nihilism or something, or
Yeah,
Marxism, and
yeah. Like last year we had, or last semester we had an ethics course, and a lot of metaphysics, or what am I trying to say here? Meta ethics seminar,
right.
and some of my friends are like really attracted to um like moral anti-realism.
Oof.
Yeah. And like, I mean, they're my friends. I don't think you know, they really in their heart of hearts believe that. But it's concerning, because then like we'll have another ethics class and they're all about like the moral claims. It's just like,
Sure.
if you put the two classes together and what you learned and what you hold, like they don't actually go together. So that's why like I really appreciate Christian universities, because they do give you that way to like systematize it all.
Sure.
um so yeah, I think you made the right choice. I think you made the right choice.
Yeah, and I think too, seeing some of my peers, unfortunately, in the undergrad level, um, they were going through some of them were going through existential, um, not just doubt, almost existential dread every
Mhm.
class.
Wow.
Yeah, it was actually quite disheartening seeing that happen to some people, because each day you learn, like for example, you learn about nominalism, right?
Mhm.
And you learn about class nominalism and resemblance nominalism, and you learn about David Lewis and all this stuff. And then on the other hand, you learn about um, David Armstrong's theories of universals, or Aristotle's theories of universals and stuff. And you kind of reach a point where you're kind of like, well, what do I believe?
Mhm.
Like they both seem, sort of at the beginning stage, they both seem like they're on a playing field. Like there's good arguments for both, right?
Mhm.
And I think if you don't have any prior ground, right? If you don't have
Mhm.
any foundation, you become very swayed,
Yeah.
right? You sort of are always having to go through belief transformation, right? You're always having to change your mind. And I think that's what happened to some people. I think some people were having, and it's quite chaotic, because these, for example, metaphysics is just, it changes the way you see the world, right? It changes how
Mhm.
you see objects, how you see people, how you see animals, how you see um, the government, how you see law.
Yeah.
These things are abstract, at some level. So depending on what theory you hold to, you can actually change your whole worldview. So I think that was a concern for some people,
Yeah.
which I never really experienced, at least at the undergrad level.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So okay, so you decide on Biola. You're at Biola, which is like a flagship of evangelical education.
dispensational. Yeah.
I'm actually not too sure what that means. What does that mean?
So dispensationalism is a broad term, um,
Like,
based
I know
on
it
what
has to do with like end times, but
kind of it does touch on that. And Biola is, I would say close to being ground zero for dispensationalism. Um, dispensationalism is a very popular theory in America. Um, basically arguing that, well, yeah, I'm not too sure. Basically, the core dispensational belief is a rejection of Israel and the church being the same. Um,
Okay, so this is where you get like a lot of like the boomer Zionism sort of a thing.
maybe though there are varieties of dispensationalism, to be honest,
Hmm.
to be fair. And a lot of dispensationalists have moderated, thankfully.
Hmm.
But a lot of the left behind worldview, a lot
Yeah,
of
like the
the,
Tim LaHaye stuff, and
yeah, Ryrie Study Bible, if you know what that
oh,
is.
yeah, I have a copy. Yeah, yeah.
He was a very big dispensationalist back in the, I want to say, like 80s, I think.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, Biola is very still dispensational.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if every professor holds to that, but I think a
Yeah,
lot of them argue for that for
yeah,
sure.
and I know that they're very when it comes to that stuff. Like I know they just let a professor go.
Oh
Who
wow,
I really respect, Clay Jones.
really?
Yeah, because he could not, in like good faith, sign off on the dispensationalism stuff.
Whoa,
Yeah, so he's not there
I
anymore.
did not know that.
Yeah, and like it was like a no hard feelings sort of a thing, but apparently like the board at Biola was like, there's a lot of threats out there, right? It's like the liberalism and stuff like that.
Hmm.
That's like that has already like taken over LMU.
Hmm.
So they're trying to sort of like let's just keep it really close to the chest here. And I know from what I've read from Clay Jones is that Craig Hazen really went to bat for him. Like let's just make a one exception in this case because he's solid. He's not what it is that we're trying to defend ourselves from. So I know that.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And another thing that I've heard, although I can't really confirm this, is that there's another professor there a couple of years ago who I also really respect. He had a difficult time getting tenure. John, do you know John Mark Reynolds?
Yes, I know that name. I know
Yeah,
who he is.
yeah, yeah. And
Hmm.
I think he started the Tory program, and he
He was
was
one of, yeah, he was a big guy in that, I think.
yeah. And now he's doing like his own classical education stuff, like
Hmm.
in Texas or something, and he's doing
Right,
great. Like he's got like the new St. Constantine school.
right.
Um, but from what I understand, it was difficult for him to get tenure because he's Orthodox.
Well, he became Orthodox at Biola.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he
Okay.
converted at, as far as I know, don't quote me on this. I don't want anyone fact checking me on this,
Hmm.
because I'm just going off of hearsay.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I believe he became Orthodox at Biola. So I think he just stayed on for a few more years, and then I don't know exactly what happened,
Hmm.
but yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, is there something going on at Biola that's like turning their people on to Orthodoxy? Because first it was
I'm not
John Mark
sure.
Reynolds, and then I have another friend Basil who became
Hmm.
Orthodox, and then you. So what's going on at Biola that's turning you on to Orthodox?
I don't think it was. So if you want me to sort of start at the beginning of why I'm Orthodox, that's a really good question because I don't really know when it began. I don't
Mhm.
think it began at Biola.
Okay.
Um, so fast, kind of go back through my history, right? If you can go back again, around the New Atheism time period, I think we said like 2007 or something like that.
Yeah.
There was a lot of YouTube videos, or YouTube was kind of a big thing back then. It still is, obviously,
Yeah.
but it wasn't as sterilized as it
Yeah.
was
Yeah. It was
today.
like a new frontier. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So back then, I mean, it was very by today's standards, it would be kind of archaic, you know,
Hmm.
low
Yeah.
quality videos and
Oh
everything,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
couldn't upload more than 10 minutes.
Yeah. I remember that.
I
Yeah.
mean, crazy stuff. I mean, stuff we take for granted, right?
Yeah.
Like this video is gonna be more than 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so there was a lot of debate with young Earth creationists and atheists. And there was a fellow by the name of Tommy Hamilton, who was a theistic evolutionist at the time, and he was a Protestant. And he was young. He was a young kid. He was only like, I think in 2007. I think he's like 3 or 4 years younger than me. So he would have been like 13 or so. He was debating people at the age of 13, 12 even, I think. And like all the videos are still up. Like it's crazy. He went under the name Cabane the Christian on YouTube.
That's a cool name.
And yeah, it was really good. And he was just really well read, and he was one of the few voices in this community that was trying to, sort of split the difference, right? He was trying to say, hey, like, I'm a Christian, but I believe in evolution, right? That kind of thing.
Wait,
So I
what
started
did you say
watching
this guy's name was?
Tommy Hamilton. He now goes by a different name. I'll mention. I'll get there.
I think I
I'll
know
get
who
there.
this is. Okay,
I'll
all
get
right.
there. So yeah, so he debated Matt Dillahunty, right, of the Atheist Experience.
Yeah, cringe.
I believe in 2009, that was sort of like his, people like started to go like, whoa, who's this guy? He debated him on air live about the historicity of the Gospel of Matthew. But he converted. He converted to Eastern Orthodoxy. I can't remember exactly how or why. I think, I'm not sure, but I remember hearing about this. This was again like 2009 when he converted to Orthodoxy. I was like, I don't know what this Eastern Orthodoxy stuff is. This is. I always knew Roman Catholicism, obviously, because I went to a church that was, unfortunately, very not merely disagreeing with Roman Catholicism, but very anti-Catholic.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean everyone there was against Catholicism, but the doctrine from the top down, I guess you could say, was very angry.
Historically, angry. Okay, I was just gonna say historically Protestant.
Yeah, no, sure, but I mean, Anglicans would be a lot more open-minded, and even Lutherans, I
That's
think,
true.
to Catholicism.
Yeah.
So very, I came from a church that was very, not just disagreed with Roman Catholics, not just thought they were wrong, but almost, almost. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth or anything like that, but from my experience, I got that feeling, and I always felt that way. Even as a Protestant, I always felt like that was wrong. To straw man the positions of other Christians, or refuse to call them Christian, to call them another faith. I thought that was kind of like, wait, that can't be true. But that's a side point. So for my whole life, I always thought there was Protestant and Catholicism. I had no idea what this Eastern Orthodoxy stuff was. So when Tommy Hamilton, later his name he took on the name Seraphim.
Yeah, okay.
From
I thought that's who
Saint
that was.
Seraphim of Sarov. Saint Seraphim of Sarov. I remember asking, so this was maybe the early stage of me converting to Orthodoxy. I remember asking one of my, so at my church, we had, the main congregation, right? The main service. And then we had smaller groups, right? We would meet like fellowship groups. I'm not sure if that term means anything to you. Sort of like, the college group, and the youth group, and the 50-year-old plus group, etc. Married people group.
Yeah.
To sort of get that tailoring, right, to different styles. So one of our Bible study leaders that I was really close with, at our Bible study, he was Russian. He was a Russian gentleman, and he was also going to the seminary at my church. He was a seminarian, so he was well read. He was a well-read individual. He was from Russia. He left Russia, I believe, in the early 90s, I want to say, right before the fall
Mm-hmm.
of communism.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to him as an authority
Mm-hmm.
on what is Eastern Orthodoxy, what is this about? Give me something. I want to know, right? Because I was like, this is strange.
Yeah.
I've never heard of this. Why have I never heard about this before? So I went to him. I remember it was at a Bible study retreat. I believe this was 2010 by this point. I think early 2010. And I asked him, what do you think about Eastern Orthodoxy? What does this all mean? And I remember him saying some stuff, but I remember him saying two things that in particular stuck out to me that I've always sort of carried with me for about a decade.
Mm-hmm.
He told me that the Eastern Orthodox Church is extremely focused on the incarnation and developing the doctrine of the incarnation.
Mm.
And they're extremely focused on the doctrine of the Trinity. And then I believe, if I'm not mistaken, again, this is like a decade-old memory at this point, so I'm trying to get it right.
Yeah.
I believe he told me that the doctrine, the way they explain the Trinity is better than the West. And I was like, whoa. I was shocked by it because, I mean, he was going to a Protestant seminary. He was going to the seminary on the church campus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't just like some random seminary. It was like a church-sanctioned seminary.
Yeah.
And, very Protestant seminary. And again, he was from Russia. He spoke Russian. So I was like, well, that's weird. And I don't remember really thinking too much about it at that point. I think it was just kind of like something in the back of my head, kind of like always going like, that was an odd thing to say. You know what I mean? Very, very odd for a Protestant, younger creationist to say, right?
Yeah.
Um, and he was a lot more open to like philosophy and stuff like this, and he was a lot less. So there were some individuals at my church who were more skeptical, or maybe I don't want to say vitriolic, but maybe a little bit more hesitant to accept philosophy and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
So this Bible study leader of mine was a lot more sympathetic to philosophy. So yeah, so I took his word very to heart. And so yeah, from that point on, I guess we can fast forward to the time where I was at Biola. A lot of it started, I was going to an EV free church. So when I moved from Southern California to Bakersfield, because I'd actually live in Bakersfield. I started going to a Southern Baptist church. Yeah, I guess you could call it that. I guess you could call it like the Reformed Southern Baptist Church.
Mm-hmm.
But covenantal. They were a covenantal
That's good.
church. So they denied dispensationalism because the church I was raised in was highly dispensational. So I got a much bigger picture of the Christian tradition, the Protestant tradition especially.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, like, I remember learning so much during 2 years at that church in Bakersfield. And I learned the Nicene Creed and stuff, and I was like, whoa, this is like a lot of good stuff here.
No, when you
From
say the
there, I
Nicene,
moved.
when you say the Nicene Creed was like, it's been my experience, like really learning that for a lot of the Protestants is like their first interaction with historic Christianity.
Sure.
Was that yours as well?
Probably yes.
Okay.
I mean, I've always heard of Saint Augustine. I always heard of Saint Augustine. I mean,
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
I mean that was really the. It
Yeah,
was
especially
sort
if you're a
of.
Calvinist. Yeah, he's big. He's like the proto-Calvinist.
Yeah. We'll get to there. We'll get to there.
Yeah, for sure.
But you always hear of John, right? Revelation or whatever, and then that's the end of the That's the end of the New Testament canon. Then there were some things that happen during the book of Acts, right? And
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And then fast forward after Constantine, you get Augustine, and then fast forward way later, you get Martin
To
Luther, and
Germany.
then
Yeah.
the Reformation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
like
kind of how
nothing happened for like 1,000 years.
So when I heard the Nicene Creed at my Southern Baptist church, I was like, this is weird. Like, what does it mean? I believe in one holy Catholic apostolic faith, and I'll get to that point at some point in a minute. But so from there, I moved down to La Mirada, right? I moved down for Biola
Mm-hmm.
2016, and I attended a EV Free Church, right? Which is like I think they're like an offshoot off of Lutheranism or something, kind of like a.
I've seen them around. Yeah, they're getting popular.
Yeah, there's one right by Biola, and there's one in Fullerton, or it's two in Fullerton, but I think they're different leaders. Anyway, I remember going to this church, and I was just feeling very dry. Like that feeling when you just feel like you're in the desert, right? Spiritually, you just feel like you're yearning, right? You're like, what's wrong here? There's something wrong with. Why do I feel like I don't want to go to church? Like I'm learning all this stuff. I was taking at that point. I was taking metaphysics. I was taking I think I was taking my first theology class. It's about a year, I think. Yeah, I was at that EV Free Church for about a year. I was taking my first philosophy class, my first epistemology class and stuff, all from Christian teachers and stuff. And I was gaining a lot. I was learning a ton. And I just remember thinking, like, something's off. Something's very strange and something's amiss. And I remember when I started thinking that, it started to happen when the church decided to put up paintings of Moses and Sarah in the church, right? I think they were going through like a study on that period of the Bible, right? The Exodus period, right? They were going to do a study in that. They were very like modernist, sort of contemporary looking paintings.
So you couldn't like immediately tell it was Moses and Sarah? You
couldn't. I mean, it looked exactly. I mean, it was very sort of. They almost looked like they were from a. I don't know. It was very like sort of strange to me. It was weird. It was odd.
Yeah.
And this is a church. This is a low church. 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 So they didn't have art on the walls or anything. It was basically four walls and a stage, right? So so I was like, this is very odd. I was thinking this sort of coincided with my dryness, right, spiritually. And I think around this time, this was in 2017 at this point, I believe fall 2017, I was reading Augustine. We had to read Augustine's what was it? On the literal interpretation of Genesis.
Okay.
For our theology class. I think it was one of the first things we read, if I remember correctly. And I remember getting into it. I'm like, okay, here we go. We're reading Augustine. And I've read Augustine before. I think I read some excerpts of the Confessions and stuff, and some of his quotes and whatnot before. But I actually reading a treatise, right, on the literal interpretation. So I thought this was going to be some young Earth creationist.
Oh yeah.
Thing.
Yeah.
And
to your surprise,
I'm reading it and I'm like, whoa, this is shocking.
Yeah.
I was floored because I found one allegory, right? An allegorical interpretation of Genesis, which he considered literal. He actually called this literal. Two, I found that he was interpreting the Old Testament through the New Testament. So he was taking what he knew from the New Testament and applying that to the Old Testament, which was something I never knew. I was like, this is odd. And three, he was symbolic. And he was not afraid to delve into the symbolism, right? And in a lot of Protestantism, is very sort of wooden literalism, right? It's very
Yeah.
like, let's look at the author's intent, let's look at the hermeneutical principles, let's look at the,
Do you think that's because of like a lot of Protestantism has been like infiltrated by the historical critical method? Yeah.
I
Is
think
that where
that's
that's coming
exactly
from?
right.
Okay.
I do think that's exactly right. I do think there's they wouldn't they wouldn't accept the historical critical method. They would caution the historical critical method,
Hmm.
but I think they're still working within that framework
Yeah.
at the end of
Yeah.
the day. Um, and so when I read a patristic father, right, a Latin father, I was I was like, this is so odd, but this is so valuable.
Yeah.
I felt like someone was going like, here's some water, right?
Ah.
Like you're
Yeah.
in the desert and you're just like, and someone runs up to you and gives you something, and I'm just like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this is what people have been talking about this whole time, Saint Augustine.
Hmm.
So after that, I read another Saint Augustine piece. I believe it was called On Christian Doctrine, I
Hmm.
believe, and I was even more shocked. This was around the same time. I think we read two of them back to back, if I remember correctly. Um, in this work, he was quoting from the apocryphal books like Tobit,
Yeah.
Judith, etc. And I was always taught that these books were non-canonical, that they were dubious, right? That they were not inspired, that they had no Holy Spirit behind them in their
Right.
authorship. And I was like, well, here's a saint, right? That everybody likes,
Yeah.
that Protestants and Catholics both like. And, they quote all the time. It's very influential in the West. And even one of my former pastors even said that, all of Western civilization is built on Augustine. So I was like, well, this guy's quoting from Tobit and Judith and all, Maccabees and stuff. What is going on here? And
Yeah.
he's quoting it like he's not just quoting it like an example, he's
Hmm.
quoting it authoritatively, right?
Yeah.
And this was all coinciding with this strange dryness, right?
Mm.
This strange feeling of being disconnected
Yeah.
and being um, feeling like something was wrong. So from that point, I'm trying to remember exactly where we are in the story. So I think I started to really dig,
Hmm.
right? I really started to dig. I really started to look at the church fathers, right? What did the fathers actually say? Because I've always heard the church fathers and then, select quotes, but I wanted to read the church fathers directly. And I think one of the first ones I read after Augustine, obviously, was Ignatius of Antioch,
Mm.
right? And I was reading, I was reading it, and again, more shock that Ignatius of Antioch says clearly, and he was born in AD 35, right?
Yeah.
Like Jesus was crucified and he was born, you know? Like he knew Peter, like he knew these people. He was the bishop of Antioch. And in his writings, he writes to a bunch of churches, right?
And was he
He's
the
being
one that? Sorry, was he the one that was like a disciple of Polycarp? Was
no,
it?
that would I'm not sure. He might be. I'm not sure.
Who
They
was
all
a
knew each
disciple of
other.
John?
Polycarp was a disciple of John. I know that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if Polycarp was before Ignatius.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. And his name means God bearer. His name means fire bearer. It's just a very interesting name.
Yeah.
But he's being brought to Rome, right, to be killed, to be given to the lions. He's writing all these letters to the Church of Philippians, the Church of Ephesians, the Church of Ephesus, right, the Church of Smyrna, right, in the book of the Apocalypse, right,
Hmm.
and in the book of the letter to the Sumerians, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. He says things like the heretics do not believe that the body or that the bread is the body of Christ and the blood or the wine is the blood of Christ. Like, how this is odd.
Yeah.
This is very strange. And he's talking about bishops, he's talking about priests, he's talking about baptism.
Oh yeah.
It's very clear. It's very clear, very succinct, not esoteric, not complicated.
Yeah, it's just sort of like we all kind of know this.
We all do. Yeah, they're just
Yeah.
sort of like we all know this, right? And the Gnostics reject it. The ones that deny that Christ came in the flesh, right? That he was
Mhm.
resurrected. So from that point, I was really like, okay, something's off here. What have I been in?
Yeah.
What have I accepted, right?
Hmm.
Or maybe not accepted. Maybe I don't want to use that word. Maybe what have I been raised into, right?
Yeah.
And again, at this time too, I'm taking metaphysics class. We're learning about Aristotle. We're learning about teleology, right? We're learning about realism, right?
Hmm.
My teacher at Biola was very an advocate of Aristotelianism, neo-Aristotelianism.
Hmm.
So I'm like, well, that seems right, because Aristotelianism, after we left this sort of, maybe not Aristotelianism, but this sort of common classical ancient worldview at the Enlightenment period,
Yeah.
when that was rejected and thrown out to a degree, it kind of came in steps, that things got progressively worse. And we sort of run into Nietzsche in the 19th century, and he's sort of the culmination of the rejection of, or he's sort of maybe the prophet even saying, God is dead, we have killed him, right?
Hmm.
He's sort of the prophet of the time saying like, hey guys, like, something's bad's happening. And then we get World War I and World War II. And we get all existentialism and a bunch of nihilism and stuff, and a lot of war, a lot of deaths in the 20th century. So I read Ignatius. I decided to read Thomas Aquinas, uh, the Summa Theologiae.
Hmm.
I had it in my possession. I think I got it in 2015 or so, 2014, 2015. I wanted to use it for my philosophy classes and stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the first big papers I wrote in my undergrad was on the five ways, actually in
Nice.
2009, I believe, in my Greek philosophy class, the one I mentioned at the beginning.
Hmm.
And so I had some acquaintance with Thomas Aquinas, and a lot more at that point because I read Plantinga and stuff, and he talks about Aquinas. And so I read, well, what does Aquinas think about the Eucharist? I want to get a solid answer,
Hmm.
from someone who's learned, right? Not just from some guy on the internet. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
want to really dig. So I spent, I believe that January, I believe this was in 2018 at this point, I believe, December, I think this was December 2017 to January 2019, I believe. I read everything that Aquinas wrote in the Summa Theologiae on the Eucharist. And I read it very carefully, very slowly. And I was like, this makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, at least, at least as a theory, right? Because I always thought that the doctrine of the Eucharist, broadly the real presence doctrine, right? I always thought that was kind of weird. Like,
Hmm.
how do Christians believe this? You know what I mean? Why do Christians believe this? Even when I was a Protestant, even back in 2008, 2009, I always thought this was kind of a strange thing. How do you believe? Clearly, the bread is still bread, right? Like clearly, right?
Yeah.
And then reading Aquinas' view, I kind of put a doubt there. I kind of had to go, well, maybe Ignatius has a point. Maybe Ignatius is not full of hot air. So um, from that point, I started to think, well, I have to do something. I have to do something. I have to change my behavior because beliefs aren't just in the head, right?
Yeah.
Beliefs aren't just these um, causally inert sort of things, right? Beliefs actually change your behavior. Like if you believe, like for instance, you have a pro-life message on your wall in the back, right?
Yes.
I am a pro-life. I am the pro-life generation, right?
Hmm.
If you and I, we both accept the pro-life thesis, if we truly believe that, we're going to act a certain way,
Hmm.
we're going to treat human beings in a certain way, we're going to vote a certain way, we're going to, you know, talk to people in different ways, right? It's going to change our behavior. We're not just going to be like, I believe in pro-life as just a theory or something, you know, and just leave it at that.
Yeah.
We're going to actually, hopefully, beliefs, the core beliefs of our being should change our behavior, right? They should change our choices.
Hmm.
Even I think things as basic as aesthetic preferences, right?
Hmm.
You know, I'm a big fan of the color red. I actually wore red today, apparently.
Nice.
um, that's gonna play a selection in what I choose. You know,
Yeah.
I'm gonna maybe choose a red rose for my, you know, future wife compared to a white rose or
Yeah.
something. You know, maybe I'm gonna choose a red car over a white car. You know,
Hmm.
so even seemingly meaningless or trivial beliefs, I think play a role
Yeah.
in how we believe and how we act. So at this point, I was like, I have to figure out what is going on. And I attended an Eastern Orthodox church, St. John the Baptist in Anaheim.
Okay.
I actually met an Orthodox individual back in November 2016, around the election time. I was at Starbucks and I was just reading for, I think, probably one of my first papers actually in grad school. And this gentleman walked by, and he was a strange fellow. He was giving me some Bible tract or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was very odd. It was kind of an odd website. I looked at he like gave me a website to look at. It's one of those, like, you know, GeoCities websites or something. You know, they're very like
Yeah.
cringe. Uh, you know, like Jesus coming back and you better be prepared or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, it's just, and I told him I was a Christian, like, you don't need to do this, and he just kept on. It was some weird, like, you know, origami thing he was doing or something weird, like to show
Oh,
me
that's
the gospel
cringe.
or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very strange. He was an older gentleman, so I don't want to, you know, bag on him, but this gentleman, this guy sitting behind me, you know, I was talking to him. I'm like, wasn't that? I was telling him, like, wasn't that weird that that guy just came up to me and um, did that? And he was like, yeah, that is weird or whatever. And we started talking, and I find out he's an Orthodox Christian. He actually goes to St. John the Baptist, and he was telling me all this stuff, and I don't even remember. I mean, he was a Republican too, and all this stuff. I'm just like, you know, we talked for like an hour and a half. You know, it was so refreshing. It was such a refreshing moment.
Hmm.
So I think that's why in 2018 I was like, maybe I should check out this Eastern Orthodox church. Um, and yeah, so I remember going, and I was really nervous. I was actually really nervous, because I felt like I was doing something wrong.
Mm.
I felt like I was putting myself in a position of, um, I don't know. It was very strange. I was very anxious going, and it didn't help going into the church. Um, I remember the first thing. I remember the time entering into an Eastern Orthodox church. I remember it was a lot of chanting, um, a lot of people lining up to buy candles,
Mm.
a lot of people doing the sign of the cross, right? A lot of people doing venerating icons, kissing icons, a lot of incense. I mean, a ton. I mean, there was not a square inch that did not have that did not have incense.
Right.
And I remember going in, I was just like, my anxiety meter was just like at the top. I was freaking out, dude. Like, I'm telling you, I thought like, this is weird. Um, I don't know what's happening. What's all this stuff going
Hmm.
on? It was just a lot of movement. People were walking around. And I remember going up to one of the ushers, and nicest lady, sweetest lady. And I told her, like, I almost like begged her, like, help me. I don't know what I'm doing. And she was at the doors of the nave, like to go, or yeah, to get into the nave.
Yeah.
And I said, like, I go to a Protestant church, I go to a evangelical school. I just want to know what, because I've been to Roman Catholic churches before in my life. You know, I know I know what the Roman Catholic church is like. So I
Hmm.
wanted to experience an Eastern Orthodox church. So this was such a like it was such an overload of sensory overload of
Mm.
every sense of smell, hearing, everything was
Yeah.
just like
Your whole
visual.
being is
It,
participating. Yeah.
it was just crazy, right? So um she was very like sympathetic to me. She's like, okay, you know, I'll tell you where to sit. And I was very nervous. I was like kind of shaking, I think. And the liturgy was in half Greek, half, well, actually, it was in Greek and English, actually. It was bilingual.
Okay.
So you heard Kyrie eleison, right? So this is a very common phrase in the Divine Liturgy of John Chrysostom.
Hmm. Hmm.
Lord have mercy,
Yeah.
right? Kyrie eleison. So you hear that, and then you hear Lord have mercy, right? So you hear both. And it was all, so there were a lot of sections in Greek, and then the priest would say it in English. And the prayer book was like in one side was Greek, one side was English. And I'm just like, what is going on? And I remember just like being like, and I think I was this whole time just like looking at the stained glass and then looking up and seeing the dome of Christ looking down. Right, this is a common icon
Hmm.
in Orthodox churches of Christ looking down, and usually you'll see the four apostles. You'll see the gospel writers. So you'll see
Right.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Sometimes you'll see it in their animals, right? They're like the
Right. The
ox,
lion, the
right?
ox, the eagle.
Right. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
in front of you, you'll see the Blessed Virgin with Christ sitting on her lap. This is like sort of at the front, and then you see this very strange thing called the iconostasis, right? Some people pronounce it differently. Icon screen, right, with all these icons, and I was like,
Yeah.
this is really weird. And there's doors, and people are coming out of the angel doors,
Yeah.
and it's very odd. And I did not understand it, and I'm like, why are there people coming out of here, and why are there altar boys doing circles and stuff? And so I eventually, the usher brought me over. She's like, sit with this older lady, this really old, not super nice lady.
Babushka.
She was Greek, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think they call them that in the Greek. I don't know exactly, but
Yeah.
super nice lady, super nice. I think she was widowed. Um, and she just sort of like quietly walked me through the liturgy. She was like, "This is what's going on. This is what it means. You know, this is why the priest wears this and stuff." Kind of like
Wow.
during it, right? And I'm like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Okay,
Nice.
you know, weird." Yeah, it was kind of like trying to keep my attention and also kind of like listening. So I remember from that, I just felt like, whoa, like what is going on? And then I had, I talked to these people, and they were super nice people at the coffee hour. And it was just, they were so loving, they were so loving, and they didn't care that I was Protestant. They didn't even try to like, they didn't even try to say like, this is why you should be Orthodox.
Hmm.
They weren't trying to do anything like that. They weren't trying to tell me anything or convert me or anything. And I found that to be kind of like strange, because usually like in Protestantism, you'll hear of like, if a Roman Catholic comes in, you'll be like, oh, why do you believe that? You know what I mean? You'll
Yeah.
you'll you'll, you'll try to, poke
Where's that in
holes
the
or something,
Bible?
or
Yeah.
yeah, something like that. You know what I mean? Or in any belief, usually people like to convert people. That's just
Hmm.
human nature, I think.
Hmm.
And I just found such a peace here. And the priest, I signed a visitor check-in. He like said, "Thank you, Jesse, for being here and stuff." And I was like, "Great." very kind. You know what I mean? Like
That's nice. I like that.
you don't hear that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it kind of left an impression on me. Um, this was in Meat Fair Sunday, 2018. So this is in February 2018, and it was on the Last Judgment too. It was like kind of weird. It was like one of those days like to pick. Like the icon of the Last Judgment is on the
Yeah.
bulletin. It's like wow, fire and brimstone time.
Yeah. So early.
But so yeah, that was kind of I've been talking for a long time, but that was kind of the beginning of um my conversion, I think, to the Eastern Orthodox Church. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have anything to say at this point, but yeah, I need to take a little water break.
Yeah, no, no, take your break. No, that's okay. So all these things, they're giving you a kind of satisfaction, and it's just like, wow, like it's fulfilling my desire. Was there anything uh, within Orthodoxy that was maybe not doing that, or it was a little bit harder to accept, or hard to kind of swallow, or you didn't understand it at first, and you kind of had a struggle with?
Well, to be honest, before I started to really delve into the church and like start attending, um, weekly,
Hmm.
I actually did attend an Anglican church for a year, and it was a high church, and the priest, Father Greg Peters, is a monastic scholar. So it was very good. It was very interesting. The people there were really good people. I learned a lot. Um, Very similar to the Roman Catholic Mass,
Hmm.
from what I
Yeah.
can tell. Um, Maybe some things are different, but overall the structure
Well, they don't have
is
the real presence.
well, they believe in the real presence.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, I know they
yeah.
do.
I mean, yeah. I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
Formally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Formally, I guess from the chair,
Yeah.
they don't. But
But as far as their
uh,
liturgy goes, it is very similar.
it's very Latin.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I attended that for a year to kind of be prudent, actually, and see what was the best Protestant sacramentalism, right?
Hmm.
And while I found good things, to be frank with you, Adrian, I I still don't know what Anglicanism even is. I mean, to be frank with you, I mean, I don't I love my Anglican friends.
Hmm.
One of my best friends is Anglican, and we talk theology all the time and philosophy. He's a philosophy guy,
Hmm.
and we talk politics and stuff all the time. But I had trouble figuring out what made Anglicanism really distinct, or I just felt it to be kind of a conglomeration of either a conglomeration of beliefs or a sort of Catholic on the sacraments and or what they deem as Catholic on the sacraments
Hmm.
and the baptism, because they do paedo baptism,
Yeah, for sure.
and but then Protestant on the uh, solas maybe, but even
Hmm.
then that's kind of like depends on who you talk to.
Yeah, I mean,
I found a
myself,
lot of it. Yeah,
like
I,
I've
I
had difficulty considering them Protestants in a lot of respects. Yeah.
they yeah it depends on who you talk to. Like I've been to Anglo Catholic churches, which are very, a lot more Catholic,
Hmm.
and then I've been to more middle of the road. You know what I mean? But yeah, I felt, and then a lot of the Anglicans are dealing with women's ordination,
Yeah.
even the conservatives. So I was in the Anglican Church of North America, which is they split from the Episcopalians, I
Yeah.
believe, the 90s, I believe.
Yeah. No, no, no. One of my good friends who was a customer, or is a regular customer at Chick-fil-A. He's one of the Anglicans in America, and
Right.
he's as high church as he can be, considering the architecture of his
Sure.
little parish. And yeah, like he's not very for women's ordination, but it's something like he is like willing to tolerate. So,
Yeah, and I don't think like
I mean, the head of the Anglican Church is a woman.
Right. So the Anglican Church in Canterbury is different
Oh, are they?
than yeah. So Anglican ecclesiology, as far as I can tell, and I don't want to say this,
Yeah.
I
I'll
don't
have an
want to have
Anglican friend come on. Don't worry about it.
and dispute me on this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, as far as I can tell, because I've been talking to my Anglican friend about this, who should have on, by the way, if you want,
Yeah, for sure.
if he decides he knows his stuff, he knows theology better than me. But as far as I can tell, the ecclesiology of which is doctrine of the church stuff is very similar to Orthodoxy.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, they
the
are because some there's a question, especially when it comes to whether the Catholic Church is going to recognize um, the Anglicans liturgy, especially or at least their bishops. Um, because the Pope did have like a commission on this, and there is an official declaration. They're like, no, like the right of ordination for bishops has changed, and so therefore their bishops are no longer valid. However, there have because of the relationship with the Anglican Church and the Orthodox, it does seem like through that route, perhaps they can still have valid uh, bishops or even valid sacraments because of oh, I don't know, just the liturgical stuff that they did with the Orthodox. Because we accept the validity of the Orthodox bishops.
right.
So maybe through that route, but through like the Anglican rite, I think officially we're saying no, like that's not valid.
Actually, back in the no, back in the 1920s, the Russian Orthodox Church almost was very close to communion with the Anglican Church and then they decided to start doing women's ordination, and then they broke off immediately.
Yeah, yeah, because that's going to
Um,
be a problem. Yeah.
it's going to be a big problem, and even in Anglican Church in North America, which is it's got its own bishops and everything. There's still some parishes with women priests, and in even in my parish that I attended, there was a woman priest that would occasionally attend, um, which was again, it's not the historical faith.
Hmm.
It's not in the early church. You don't find women priests or women bishops in the early church. You don't find that for a really, 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 really long time, possibly even 20th century. You'll find women deacons,
Yeah,
but you won't find women priests or bishops. That's just a modern
yeah,
invention.
yeah.
Unfortunately,
And even the role of the
yeah,
ancient female deacons is something of a dispute.
it's different. It's different
Yeah,
than yeah, you're right. There is a yeah, it is different than maybe how we yeah.
yeah,
I don't necessarily know that too much, but I have heard that for sure that there is
yeah,
some distinction there too.
yeah. Okay,
So,
so you're in this Anglican stuff. You're learning about the sacraments. Okay, so what is it that's difficult for you?
well, the first thing for me, well, I guess before I even get into like, the difficulties with orthodoxy, the things I had to sort of, the hurdles I had to overcome,
Hmm.
I had to first overcome some philosophical hurdles.
Hmm.
And this was before even attending the Anglican church and everything. This is sort of like going through Biola.
Hmm.
The first hurdle was uh, God. Actually, you want me to just be frank. I had a I don't want to maybe say heretical, but I had a very problematic view of God. And
Were
this
you
is
were you like a theistic personalist?
I was about to say that.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
So I believe that God um, was knowable through univocal language,
Mm,
and as opposed to maybe more of the classical approach, which is God is known through analogical language,
hmm.
perhaps, or maybe not analogical. Maybe we can't know God very well. Um, and another thing, I thought of God as being um, kind of just a maximally great being.
Yeah.
And at face value, that doesn't seem problematic,
Hmm.
but it kind of is when you start to think of God as having, if God's just a maximally great person, right? Well, persons are constitutions, right?
Yeah.
Persons are composites, right? We have body and soul
Hmm.
and spirit, right? We have a composite nature. So to say that God is a person in the same way we're a person is uh, very problematic historically, and theologically.
Hmm.
And when you start to really think about that, you kind of make God sort of, I don't want to straw man my theistic personal friends, but this idea that God is just sort of up for scientific inquiry,
Yeah.
philosophical inquiry, that like there's some. So the univocal means one meaning, right? There's only
Hmm.
one meaning to the text, whereas analogical is like by analogy, right?
Yeah.
So St. Thomas Aquinas would say we know God analogically, right? Univocally may be another story, but we don't, like when we say God is loving, we don't mean that God has like a property of loving,
Yeah.
because that would make him a composite entity. But God is fully simple, right?
Yeah.
In some sense, God is being, right? And when I started learning this and actually coming to accept what is known as classical theism,
Hmm.
that was already a big hurdle surpassed. Um, because I started to see like, wait, hang on, I believe in what I believe David Bentley Hart has called it was he called it monotritheism or something like that?
Yeah.
Like monopolytheism.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that, it's very, it's not the classical picture of God.
Right. Yeah.
And the
And the
father,
ancients
yeah,
believed in the classical picture, especially when it came to divine
yes,
simplicity. I mean, for
yes.
the Catholic Church, it's the de fide. Like you have to believe in divine simplicity, which is like like the I think one of like the big foundations of classical theism.
You have to believe that God is not just um Saint John of Damascus, I believe, in Maximus Confessor has these ideas, right? These quotes,
Hmm.
almost saying that God doesn't exist. I know that sounds kind of weird
Yeah.
at first, but
Right. You
God
can't
is not
predicate
right.
existence to him. Yeah. 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 Because then
God is
there's a distinction between his being and his existence, which you can't
like
do.
if we have the class of every existing thing in this field, right?
Hmm.
God is above that, right?
Yeah.
God is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's not a being, he's the being
Yeah.
from which all being exemplifies or
Hmm.
stems from, right?
Yeah. Depends
That
on. Yeah.
that was sort of the first hurdle for me, overcoming this. And a lot of that had to do with a lot of the professors, a lot of the philosophers at Biola were theistic personalists,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of them. And when I started to read literature that was not theistic personalist, I started to really see some of the problems with theistic personalism,
Hmm.
especially things like even the nature of time. The nature of time was a big one for me too,
Yeah.
because I've always thought that. So I was a big advocate of a view called presentism,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is the view that the present is all that exists, right?
Hmm.
So that time is sort of like the present moment is the only slice.
Yeah.
The future does not exist, the past does not exist, but the present is all that exists. Well,
Yes.
this
The ever
frankly,
fleeting present. Yeah.
this presents a problem, right? If we hold the divine impassibility, which means that God is not fundamentally controlled by the ever whims of the passions, right? Of the flux of time, then how do you understand the relationship between God and time?
Hmm.
And I've always accepted William and Craig's view that God is outside of time without the universe, but inside time with the universe.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that was a reasonable claim until a professor of mine put a hole in that, and I started to really reconsider it. And then I started to really reconsider that in terms of the classical picture.
Mm-hmm.
Because the classical picture, John of Damascus is clear that God is timeless.
Mm-hmm.
All the patristic writers say that God is timeless.
Oh yeah.
This is what we know as apophatic theology, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
in the Catholic Latin world, it would be known as like via negativia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through the way of negation.
Yeah.
That we know God by what he is not,
Mm-hmm.
right? So God, things in time are in flux. God cannot be in flux because he's the greatest thing. He's being itself. So how can being itself be in flux? So therefore, God has to be not in time, right? As sort of a basic way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are some of the first hurdles. The other hurdle was, what was it? Getting at the I had it in my head of what I was getting at. Sort of the Aristotelian picture of, again, sort of the ethical picture
Mm-hmm.
of teleology
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. These were things I had to overcome. Um, and also too, this idea that being itself isn't univocal at all.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a thesis forwarded by a friend of mine, or a gentleman I know, actually a Biola alum, who I believe he still does work at Syracuse University. He's a philosopher at Syracuse,
Yeah.
doing his PhD. He argues that um, being is actually comes in degrees. So there's actually different
Okay.
ways to
I could see that.
exist, right?
Yeah. From Aristotelian view,
So
I could see that. Yeah.
right. So once you accept that, then that fits very clearly into the classical picture.
Mm-hmm.
Once you accept that, then you have to deny this like univocal, you
Mm.
know, understanding of being.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so yeah, these were some of the first hurdles for me of having to um, examine my beliefs and um, from a philosophical and theological perspective too, of having to think through things and apply them, because again, philosophy, I think Aquinas is right. Aquinas does philosophy and theology together, and I think that's the fathers did. So getting into Orthodox distinctives, I think the big thing for me was, I think the big thing, and I want to hear what you think too, because
Mm.
going to Roman Catholic, I think venerating and praying to the saints
Mm.
was a big, I think more of the veneration, specifically in Orthodoxy, we kiss icons and stuff. I think that was initially
Mm.
kind of like weird.
Okay.
I think too, because we're very Western, just in general in our society,
Mm-hmm.
we think of like germs being on things and stuff.
Yeah.
And we think like kissing things is kind of like opening yourself to like, and during this whole quarantine thing, it's kind of funny that we're
Yeah.
bringing this up, but um, kissing things is sort of like opening yourself up to the possibility of getting sick.
Yeah.
And initially, I was kind of like, this is weird, and I'm not sure if I could do this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's really the only big thing. Those two things are the only like big things I had like kind of um, hurdles.
Okay.
And that seems normal for a Protestant, I think.
Well, for a Protestant, I don't think the classical theistic
Sure,
personalist debate is too
not central at all.
not central, but definitely like veneration is a big
Sure.
thing for Protestants, especially when it comes to like not just images, because like there's a certain sense in which like yeah, there's an image, but it's kind of like it's over there and I'm over here. But when it
Right.
comes to like kissing these things, or like I want to hold this thing, or I want to parade this image around the block, then it takes on a different dimension, which makes Protestants even more uncomfortable. So yeah, I would definitely agree. Like that's a stumbling block for a lot of our Protestant friends. Yeah.
I think too. I read a book by Peter Kreeft
Hmm.
actually over the summer of 2018. This was when I was attending an Anglican church.
Hmm.
Um, it was called "Catholics and Protestants: What Can We Learn from Each Other?" I remember
Hmm.
reading this short book. It's not systematic or anything. It's just very sort of. It's almost like it's a bunch of essays on
Hmm.
certain topics, right? And Kreeft made some really good points about Mary, um, and that was sort of a good book. I recommend that book to people who want to sort of look at ecumenical dialogue
For sure.
amongst Protestants and Catholics. I think it's a good book because Kreeft was Protestant for a really long time.
Yeah, he was.
I think until his like 18 or so, 17 or 18, I believe.
Hmm.
Then he converted, and he's a great writer. He's fantastic. And that book was one of the first books I read on that because that helped me. That cleared up a lot of questions I had, even though it wasn't from an Orthodox person.
Hmm.
And then I read Timothy Ware.
Oh yeah.
He's one of our bishops. He's an English bishop.
Oh, he's
Um,
Antiochian.
no, he's in bishop in England. He's in
Oh,
England.
oh, oh.
England, yeah.
For
Across
sure.
the pond. Across
Yeah.
the pond. Yeah, Callistos Ware is his name he took on.
Hmm.
He wrote a book called The Orthodox Church, and that kind of goes over the history of the Orthodox Church. The first like half is on the history of the Orthodox
Yeah.
Church.
I
A
have one of
lot of
his books.
focus,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of it is focused on a lot of historical things that happen. And he talks a lot about Russia, about all the martyrdom of Russia, and then he gets into like Orthodox theology. He clears up a lot of things in there too, which helped, I think, initially for me.
Hmm.
Um, those hurdles, yeah, I think I haven't found too many hurdles. I feel like everything's sort of, um,
It's kind of fell into place.
yeah, and I think a lot of it too, thinking as well to hylomorphism was another thing for me that
Mm.
I didn't believe at the beginning of the Biola, and I ended up believing at the end.
Good. Good.
Um, because I always thought like that substance dualism was correct, or something like substance dualism was correct,
Hmm.
and that's not the classical picture. That's not the
No.
classical way of thinking about it.
No.
Um, that treats the body itself like it's a without nature, right?
Mm.
Without like we're just sort of inhabiting a meat suit.
Yeah.
And that's just not how Aristotle or even the Neoplatonists or the Church Fathers thought of it. Um,
Yeah. For them, because like matter is just extension, right?
right, and it's a Cartesian coordinate, right?
Hmm. Right.
That's exactly right. And during the Copernican revolution and a lot of these um, changes in the Enlightenment around the time, Descartes, right? Descartes was a Roman Catholic,
Yes, he was. Yes, he
and
was.
Rene
Is. Yeah.
Descartes had to pick his poison in a sense, right? He had to choose to save religion through the substance of the soul and detach it from the material world, because all the scientists back then
Yeah.
were
The new
looking at
science.
the scientists were looking at matter, right? And they were
Yeah.
saying it's all atoms. That's it, guys. Wrap it up. Let's go home. It's all atoms.
Yeah.
And Descartes was like, shoot, well, if it's all atoms, then what does that make the Eucharist? So to save the Eucharist, he had to invent this theory of substance dualism, and I think that whole move created a bunch of problems.
Yeah.
Um, so the hylomorphist view is more like that we are integrated organisms,
Hmm.
and we are body and soul.
Hmm.
And this makes a lot of sense in theological debates of the early seven ecumenical councils,
Yeah. Oh
which I'll
yeah.
get to, because those are kind of hurdles for me. But
Hmm.
the hylomorphic picture makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a very integrative view. Um, it, it's a lot more. It has a higher view of the body,
Oh yes.
I think, than a substance dualist view. Again, it depends on what you mean by substance dualism. I think a lot of people use that term kind of loosely.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
But
I know
here
there
I
are some
mean kind of
substance
like the standard.
dualists.
Yeah.
I know there are a couple substance dualists who they might deny what you had said earlier, like it doesn't have its own nature. I mean, like it does have
Yeah.
its own nature, but it's complete without like the soul, right? And so
Right.
in that way, in that regard, it is a substance of its own.
Right. I would
Whereas under
say
the
something.
hylomorphic, like they are neither complete without each other.
Right. I would say that the soul informs or gives life to the body.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it is integrated with the body. It's not it lives on after the death of the body,
Hmm.
via God's grace and God's power. But it is not some different substance or something like
That's right.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
think
that's
after
another
death, it
hurdle.
would be, yeah, after death, it would be an incomplete substance.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
So other problems for me was sort of undoing, or maybe not undoing, but relearning
Mm.
what exactly Christian history is.
Yeah.
Um, so I read The Orthodox Church by Callistos Ware, and I read this other book, which I actually have with me, which I would recommend to
Hmm.
people listening, called Byzantine Theology,
Okay. Oh,
by
I know the
Father John Meyendorff,
name.
historical trends and doctrinal themes. And this book goes through the history of uh, everything. I mean, it talks about the Chalcedonian church. It talks about the iconoclastic crisis, which was of the Seventh Ecumenical Council.
Hmm.
It talks about Christ, like how did the church formulate the doctrine of the two natures of Christ, right? And the one person of Christ,
Hmm.
and the two wills of Christ. These are all very complicated to someone who's unfamiliar with it. And,
Yeah.
there's a lot of good stuff in here if you want to look at the Eucharist and the. I thought this was a very good book. It's very
Yeah.
good. It's very solid.
No, I think it's very
Um,
important for Christians to have a historical
yeah,
understanding of themselves.
yeah,
Very, very important. Okay, so
definitely.
I'm curious then. So the ecumenical councils play such a huge role in our understanding and in our identity, just
Oh
as like
yeah,
the ancient church. So, and as I think the more informed Protestants might say, we appreciate the councils, but we don't think they're like, they might be like a golden standard, but they're not like an infallible standard,
right.
right? But I think, I mean, we have to say that, you and I think we have to say like, no, you need to hold them in order to count as Christian. Like, you can't deny like the Nicene Creed and be a Christian, right? Like that's why we don't consider like Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right.
So how did you
That's
react to
that's a good
like
question.
this asserting of authority, especially when it came to the councils?
It's a very good question. You're right that we need we need to not only appreciate what our bishops and priests did to defend truth,
Hmm.
right, against Arianism, against Gnosticism, against monophysitism, which is the doctrine that Christ only has one nature.
Yeah.
Nestorianism, which is the doctrine that Christ is a human person. He's not a divine person with a human nature and divine nature.
Hmm.
Um, he's just like a man walking around or something.
Yeah.
Um, the fathers defended the term Theotokos. You
Hmm.
know, this was in the Nestorian controversy with the Blessed Virgin.
Yeah.
Um, the story is pushed back and said, no, Mary is the Christotokos, which means mother of Christ, right?
Yeah.
And the church pushed back and said, well, is Christ fully God, right? Is Christ fully divine?
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, the Blessed Virgin Mary is the mother of God, right? It's very clear to me. She's the gateway, she's the portal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Between,
Earlier, when you had
yeah,
mentioned that you saw a picture of
yes,
or an icon of Mary and the infant child on her lap, usually that's because it's reference of a certain title. She's called the Seat of Wisdom.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. Well, she represents the church.
Yes.
This is very shocking for a lot of Protestants that might be listening to this later after this interview. Um, the Mary is it's very hard for a lot of people because they're very emotionally invested here.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, with the Mother of God. But Mary is the Ark of the Covenant, right? I know this sounds very strange initially, but if you think of the Ark of the Covenant in the Old Testament, what was the Ark of the Covenant? The Ark of the Covenant was the vessel that God dwelt in,
Mm-hmm.
right? That had cherubim, right,
Yeah.
flanking it, and it held God, right? They carried this, and even when people touched it, right, to stop it from falling, they died, right?
Die.
They
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
killed. So it has power, right? It has this very high importance in the Old Testament. And if you read the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse, and you read the end of Revelation chapter 11, I believe, John the Apostle's looking up
Yeah.
and he sees the Ark of the Covenant. And you have to remember this whole idea of chapters and verses is all later,
Mm-hmm.
right? There
Yeah.
is none of this in the original Bible. This is like centuries after the Bible's even formed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he looks up and he sees the Mother of God.
Yeah.
He sees a woman that is pregnant, that her child will defeat the dragon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Defeat this serpent
Yeah.
and bring the nations together of the new Israel, right? And you read that and you're like, whoa, that's that's why we think Mary is this she has the DNA of Christ. She has the Christ assumed human flesh,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which means and a human soul and a human will. He was
Mm-hmm.
fully human, and he became a human. He took on human nature completely, which came from his mother, like biologically came from his mother and the Holy Spirit. Um, so Mary is the final yes to God, right? The
Yeah.
final yes saying, enter into me. She's a model and an exemplar and a the greatest exemplar of faith. Um, yes to God at such a young age of saying the angel told her, "You will be called blessed from generation to generation." And I
I
mean,
think that was her. I think that was her cousin who said that, not the angel.
oh, was it? I thought it was the
Or no, no, no,
the
no. Mary says that herself, actually.
right,
Yeah,
right,
in
in the
Magnificat.
Magnificat,
Yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right. So yes, that's exactly right. Where do we get off of on Mary? I'm trying to remember. Where were we on before? I
Oh,
lost my train of thought. I lost my train. Oh, the ecumenical councils. That's
right,
right.
right, right, right. Yeah.
Yes, we have to. We have to. You're exactly right about the ecumenical councils. We have to treat them as being um, led by the Holy Spirit,
Mm-hmm.
and that God did not leave His church to die. Um, how do we know the canon is right?
Right.
How do we know the 27 of the books of the New Testament is right? I was talking to a friend about this. I was talking to a friend of mine about this the other day. How do we know Matthew wrote Matthew?
Yeah.
We don't. I mean, if you just look at the document,
Yeah. From a historical critical method. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, we're left. This is a anonymous writer.
Yeah.
Well, the church knew who wrote it. That the tradition was Matthew,
Yeah.
and the church had an oral tradition, right? Even the Old Testament has an oral tradition.
Mhm.
The books of Genesis, the first 12 books were written as oral tradition. Um, Moses was not there with Adam and Eve. I mean, he was not there getting these stories, right?
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was he heard these stories later on. These were either orally transmitted or written down, or there's a lot of complicated stuff with Genesis. It's very important. It's a very important book. It's an
Mhm.
extremely important book.
Oh, yes.
Um, but there's oral tradition, and even the Gospels have oral tradition because they require eyewitness testimony from other people. Like the apostles weren't in the room, weren't with Christ always, right? So some of these miracles are happening without the apostles. And you know, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things. There's the Council of Jerusalem in the
Hmm.
book of Acts,
Oh, yeah.
where they decide on should Gentiles be circumcised,
Hmm.
right? I mean, it shows to me that there was some authority, that there was some church, and even the Bible itself says in one of the Pauline letters, which is escaping me right now, says that the church is the ground and pillar of all truth.
Hmm.
Other places Protestants like to quote is Timothy, that says, "For all Scripture is God breathed and
Yep.
inspired." No one in Orthodoxy would disagree with that. No one in Roman Catholicism would disagree with that.
Right.
No one in Anglicanism would disagree with that. Um, there seems to be a mistake in logic, thinking that that somehow means that the Bible is some uninstantiated document that has no connection to history,
Right.
which is what we claim, right? We claim that the Bible is in space and time, that it was primarily in the early church heard in church. There weren't printed Bibles, unfortunately. I wish there were, but that's just not true.
Yeah.
You went to the liturgy and you heard the word of God. You heard
Yeah.
the liturgy of the word, right, which comes before the liturgy of the Eucharist. Um, and you hear the Gospels, right? You hear the epistles read, and that's how Christianity was done in the early centuries. And,
Hmm.
and there was there was a lot of fighting back then about the
Oh, yeah.
canon. Um, and the apocryphal books as well. What is deemed the apocryphal books, the deuterocanonical books, as we call them in Orthodoxy. And yeah, I mean, these things took people to decide to Athanasius has a canon, right?
Hmm.
And there's contesting over the Old Testament as well.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, it's problematic that you come up to Luther and you start seeing him question the validity of the Book of James and the Book of Revelation, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So you know we don't want to you know we, it's the church, right? It's the church. It's not. It seems to me that a lot of Protestants, not all of them, but a lot of them put their faith in one man that we hope he got it right and was correct, right? And we want to say that there's a body of believers that have held the faith
Yeah.
and that are martyrs, right? Martyrdom was a big thing too for me. You don't really hear of much martyrdom in Protestantism.
Right.
Um, Maybe Fox's Book of Martyrs you hear about occasionally.
Yeah, but that was like when they had like nations warring
Right,
against each other. Yeah, and it was
right,
like
right,
a
right.
big deal.
And martyrdom, like Ignatius of Antioch was a martyr. You know,
Hmm.
a lot of Polycarp was a martyr, right? The martyrdom of Polycarp is an actual document. A lot of the early church were martyrs. And another thing too that was sort of not a hurdle, but like something to overcome, something to think about was a monasticism.
Mm,
Because there's no monasticism in evangelicalism,
that's
none.
right. Yeah.
And um, I always remember talking to people or hearing from people who were single, right? Single
Mm,
folks who were struggling to figure their vocation.
mm,
Um, in the evangelical world, there's this sort of existential tension. If I'm single, what do I do?
yeah.
Um, and in the classical traditions, in the sacramental traditions, there is a place to go if you feel like you can't get married or don't want to get married or you want to give your life to Jesus Christ. Um, you can serve the church by being a monk or a nun.
Yeah.
And you are in Orthodoxy, we put a lot of emphasis on them. They are the heartbeat
Mm,
of the church, right? They are the prayerful heart of the center of the church. The church is not only theological and philosophical and thoughtful, but it's also prayerful. Um, there's a common Latin phrase, lex oriendi, lex
mm,
credendi, right?
yeah.
The rule of faith is the rule of prayer, I think, or something like that. I'm
Hmm.
probably confusing them. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The true theologian is the one that prays truly, and the one that prays truly is truly a theologian. I think these
I
things
like
are
that. That's well
missing.
put. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not from me. It's from a early writer. I
Hmm.
don't know if he's a saint, but I think he's a early writer on the in the early period of the church around Constantine, and also too seeing how church and state too operate in the early church with Constantine and Justinian and the emperors Helen or Helena, and how they defended the church. Um, and there's a lot of political stuff there I don't want to get into, but it's important. I think we're not just. There's this good phrase. I forget who says it, um, but it's very apt. No man is an island unto himself.
Hmm.
And when you start to look at the historical Christian faith, you realize you're not alone.
Yeah.
You realize um, there's been millions of people before me. I don't have to figure this out with some person who just started writing. I don't need to figure this out by some contemporary writer, right? Contemporary
Right.
theologians are good, but there's so much information. I mean, there's so much writing. These men, some Thomas Aquinas wrote a lot. I mean, the Greek fathers wrote a ton too. You know,
Yeah.
Gregory of Nyssa, you know, John Chrysostom, Gregory the theologian, or also known as Gregory Nazianzus, right?
Hmm.
And you know, they wrote so much, and you know, a lot of people don't even know about them. You know, so I think those are things that I had to kind of overcome, and I'm still, you know, learning, growing. Obviously, this is never ending. I mean, obviously, growing in grace, growing in uh, the grace of God is a infinite process, right? That's another thing too. The notion of salvation
Hmm.
in Protestantism, it seems that a lot of people accept this view that it's a one-time thing,
Right.
or it's this moment of like God has now declared you righteous,
Hmm.
He has paid off your debts, and um, you're free, right? You're justified.
Yeah.
And There might be some truth to that, right? I don't, this is a huge theological discussion, which we could talk about in a future video. But what is the Christian life after that? Precisely.
Yeah.
I mean, is it just reading your Bible and praying? I mean, those are great things. Don't get me wrong. The Orthodox Church has a huge emphasis on prayer. I mean, a huge, as we already said, the rule of faith
Mm-hmm.
is the rule of prayer and vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like, I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah, Scott Hahn has like a really cute analogy. I don't know if it originates in him, but I heard it first from him, where he's like, when you're a Protestant and you read the Bible, it's just like reading the menu. But then when you become Catholic, it's like you actually get the whole course, like the stuff that's mentioned in the Bible, right? Like, you want to be a monastic like John the Baptist? Okay, you can have that. You want to be an evangelist like Saint Paul or whoever? Like, you can have that.
Sure.
You want to be Pope? You can try. And you might succeed. But you can have that. So yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. This interview has been going long.
Yeah, I'm
Almost at
gonna
3 hours, I think.
yeah. I am going to cut out quite a bit. Yeah. But no, I mean, but I've just enjoyed the conversation.
Oh yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. Okay,
Do you have any
so
other question? Do you have any other questions? I think there was one
yeah,
more
okay,
question.
so yeah, no. I do have questions. Okay, so I know like we touched a little bit on art, especially within Protestantism, and one thing that I've noticed and was people kind of made a big deal about it when I became Catholic was that we had Christ actually on the cross. And a
Hmm.
lot of Protestant depictions of the cross is just like the bars and that's it.
Right.
And like we have our explanations for that. But something that you don't see, and you brought it up on your book, is you have the three bars.
Hmm. In the
Right.
prayer
So
book, yeah.
yeah. So okay. So what's that last one about? Because or the first. Okay. So the top one, I'm guessing, is the the Greek, the Latin, and the Hebrew.
Right. So it's King of the Jews, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know how it was sort of a mockery
Yeah.
when Christ. It's sort of on the Francis of Assisi cross as well. It's sort of
Hmm.
this three-tiered thing too.
Yeah.
This is big in the Russian tradition.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, the first part is the sign, right?
Yeah.
If you want to just look at it from a purely like historical thing, the first part's the sign.
Hmm.
Then that's where Christ laid his body.
Right.
Then
So what's that last one about?
that's like the symbolism of Christ trampling death,
Hmm.
right? That Christ is on a platform, and when he dies, um, he moves the platform, right? He like sort
Hmm.
of collapses. Father,
Hmm.
into my hands I commit my spirit, and it's pointing towards the right side, right? If you're looking at it this way,
Hmm.
it's pointing towards the right for the thief on the right, the thief on the cross who um, was baptized in his own blood, right? If you want to use
Right.
that term. And over here, it's referring to the other thief who denied Christ, right? So, and also, if you want to take that even further, Christ is sitting on the right hand of the Father, just like the thief was sitting on his right hand.
Hmm.
So Christ kind of in that way becomes the thief in symbolically. Um, but this also represents all three tiers, the major three tiers of hierarchy. Um, we can say this is like the head of Christ. This is where Christ's head would be,
Hmm.
and the title, right, of God, King of the Jews, referring in a sense to like the old, like the divine council, right, the essence of the Trinity. Then there's the church, right, the body of Christ, which is what we participate in, the saints, both living and non-living.
Hmm.
And then there's hell, the lower parts where the creeping things are. You'll see different versions of this cross, and sometimes you'll see sort of like the Francis of Assisi cross. You'll see images around the cross. You'll see like a sort of like the icon I showed you. You'll see like a little like a skull
Hmm.
down here.
Yeah.
Um, Again, that's getting at like that Christ descended into all three tiers
Hmm.
of reality, and yeah, I think that's right. I think
Yeah.
that's a good explanation of what it means.
Okay,
So
so I remember when we saw each other at the walk. It wasn't the Walk for Life. One Life LA,
right,
and
right, right,
you had some of your friends there, and I was just kind of like joking around because we all did like the sign of the cross, and the Latins we do left to right,
right, right, right.
and I was like, and that's the right way, and one of your friends was like really adamant. He's like, no, it's not. I was like, okay, but from what I understand, there isn't. I don't want to say that they're not right, but like we're both right in the sense that like the way it's been explained to me, and confirm or disconfirm this for me, is that in Latin, so it's like in nomine patri was like Father, Son, and in English it's Holy Spirit, but in Latin the holiness it's Spiritus Sancti, right? So the holiness is on the right,
Oh,
and it's the same thing in the Greek. That holiness is on the right, but the way you guys just the order of the words, it's left or it's right to left.
I have
And
no
so
idea. You know more than me on this. I mean, that would be that would make sense of how that why that changed.
yeah, well, it's not that it's changed. It's just that we're still trying to keep the holiness on
Sure.
the right side.
Right, right, right. But it's just a different
Yeah, it's just
way.
the language. Our language has just kind of switched it up.
Yeah, for I mean,
So I mean, do you know like in Greek how what
I
is it?
don't.
No, okay, all right.
I don't.
So
Yeah, that's beyond my
yeah, well, that's my understanding, and so because one of the things sometimes like Orthodox and Catholics can get really petty about little things like this.
Oh yeah, that's petty. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and it's just like we don't really like disagree on these things.
Sure.
Um, so okay, so I'm Catholic, you're Orthodox. Do you see a way forward for like reunification, or
Oof.
are you too new to that?
I was expecting this question. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
complicated question.
yeah.
And that
Okay, so maybe you don't have to answer that, but let me just say, do you think it'll happen? Well, yeah, even like in this generation, because it was really interesting the coronavirus situation
sure.
in that like so I have Coptic Orthodox friends, and even they were like, hey, Pope Francis asked the world to pray at
Right,
this hour, and they were all down. There was like no hesitation whatsoever.
right.
um and that was just kind of cool for me to see. So I was like, maybe there's maybe all this bad stuff will kind of end a lot of the bickering. Maybe not completely, but I think some of the pettier stuff. What do you think,
Yeah,
Jesse?
no, yeah, I do see a lot of like memes and stuff like that. I don't think that stuff is particularly helpful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I was listening to a Metropolitan talk about this actually the other day, and he said canonically the Orthodox and Catholics are very close
Hmm.
from a purely structural perspective, right?
Yeah.
Um, the things I would see are again what has been said by thousands of people before me is the filioque and the papal supremacy. I mean,
Hmm.
unfortunately, I don't. That's a whole can of worms.
Right, right, right.
That's probably another discussion or two.
Hmm.
You could probably do one thing on the filioque itself,
Hmm. Right.
but and I'm not an expert in this area at
Right. I'm
all.
not an expert on the filioque way either. I'm not trying to have a discussion on that. I'm just asking,
Right.
do you see do you think the coronavirus at least gives us an opportunity to like come back together?
Maybe I think the big problem recently was the Amazon Synod. I think
Mm.
that created a lot of problems, and I think a lot of traditional Catholics, such as yourself, were probably skeptical of a lot of that stuff, or
To
even,
put it lightly,
to put it
skeptical.
lightly.
Yeah.
Um, so we all have to admit our problems. We all have to admit, like even the Orthodox Church. I'm telling you right now, is not perfect. I mean,
Hmm.
Orthodox Church, the Orthodox in America are uncanonical.
Oh,
There's
really?
well, I should rephrase that. Hang on. We have um, too many bishops in a single city.
Mm.
Um, so there's one of the canons. I'm not sure which one, but I know that I've talked to people about this. That there can only be one metropolitan per
Yeah.
metropolis, right?
Yeah.
And that is not what's done currently. We have overlapping bishops, overlapping just jurisdictional lines.
Mhm.
That's a big problem. That needs to be cleared up in America and in the West, more
Yeah. No,
generally.
even within like Roman Catholicism, like LA is just too big,
Right, right,
and
right.
we need to like break it up. We have
Split it in
we
half or
have
two.
4 bishops for
Yeah,
LA, which
that's
is ridiculous.
for like what, 5 million people?
I don't know the population, but it's just
How many Catholics are in? Well, there's 4 million people in LA. Probably a million people then, probably, right?
yeah.
Or maybe more than that.
Mm,
I don't know. It's probably a lot.
maybe make it 1/3 because we just have a lot of Hispanics,
Yeah,
a lot of Filipinos, dude, but millions.
sure.
But still, I mean, if you were just to, because like LA, the Archdiocese of LA, like goes from like Long Beach, like way up north, like in the desert past like Six Flags where you're at,
Yeah,
on the other side of the mountains, all the way to like Santa Monica or Santa Barbara.
it's far.
That is far. Like that's huge. It's freaking huge.
It's
I
huge.
think I think we are the largest diocese in the world, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh
But
wow.
yeah, yeah. So we need to be broken up because that's just, and we're like the hotbed of just scandal as well with Mahoney. So
Yeah. Oh, even in the Orthodox Church right now with Russia and Constantinople,
yeah.
that's another big one um, happening. It's been happening for I believe a year, almost over a year, which a lot of it's political, man. A lot of the hierarchs of our faith are just sometimes sometimes my priest says sometimes the hierarchs do more persecuting of the Christians than uh
Yeah.
it's I want to be careful here, but
So do
we
we just need to
need
clean up our own houses first before we
yeah
can even
maybe
discuss?
we take a Jordan Peterson
Yeah.
approach, clean up your own room. um no, I think that's right. Um I think to approach with love too, and um, this is something I found in Orthodoxy too that really attracted me, was repentance. And actually, thought of this earlier. Repentance and love and mercy,
Mm,
um, and prayer. I think are core to the heart of Orthodoxy. And I mean, we say Lord have mercy like probably 50 times Divine Liturgy, if not more. And this idea of loving your neighbor, and I even heard this story once of the martyrs of Russia.
mm,
The priests of the Russian Orthodox Church that did not recant, did not give in to communism and atheism.
mm,
And one of them, this was an eyewitness testimony, so it was a man who saw this priest get killed, or this priest die. He saw this priest being led over to I believe, a bridge, and this priest told the people that were killing him, that were about to kill him, he told them, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." Like that is, and even with a hidden life too, on the Catholic side, with Franz Jägerstatter,
mm,
um, of this idea of love and seeing death as a gateway, hopefully, if we truly believe in Christ, as a gateway into eternal life. That death no longer has a grip over us.
mm,
And I think the martyrs are really where we need to focus on, to get past a lot of the petty junk. Because at the end of the day, like, we both confess the Trinity, we both confess the Incarnation, we both confess the 7 ecumenical councils, we both love Jesus Christ. Protestants live Jesus Christ as well.
mm,
And yeah, I mean, it's um, it's unfortunate that the church is so fragmented, for sure.
yeah.
We could be a lot more united, but I mean, Christ says this in John 17, and this is eternal life, that they may know you who you have sent. And he prays for unity of the church. And it's sad that I believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, but sometimes it doesn't feel holy, man. To be honest
Yeah.
with you, sometimes it feels like there's a lot of sinners, because the church is a hospital. You want to talk about coronavirus? Church is a hospital, man.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's a hospital for the suffering. It's a hospital for the downtrodden, right? We don't want to keep anyone out. Christ went to the lepers. He healed them. He healed people's sight. He healed them of their ailments, and he converted them. Yeah, I think that's maybe the answer. I don't know. I do think that our hierarchs need to figure this out, and they need to talk. That's the only way forward. I mean, we're a hierarchical church. Both of our churches are hierarchical.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's where we need to be. So I don't know. You had. I think you had one more question or two other questions, or you tapping out at this point?
Yeah.
3 hours.
3 hours. Yeah.
I have a lot to say. I mean, I could talk about. I love talking about this stuff.
For sure.
And being in quarantine doesn't help either, because I cannot talk to people right now. I'm like, I need to. Maybe that's why it's been so long. It's just like, it feels good to talk about it. It feels cathartic. And thankfully, I haven't had too much pushback on telling people I'm Orthodox. I haven't told very many people.
Mm-hmm.
But thankfully, it hasn't been too bad yet. Yeah, I think just a lot of people in the West just don't know about Orthodoxy in general.
That's true. That's true. Actually, I have a friend I want to bring on who is an Eastern Catholic.
Okay, good. Like a Ukrainian Catholic.
Yeah. And I think he's Maronite.
I don't know what that is.
No, wait, hold on. Yeah, but he's an Eastern Catholic, and he's very sensitive to a lot of the Orthodox sort of concerns of over Latinization. And I want to bring him on and kind of get that going, get that conversation going. So,
very good.
I think we should go. Thank you,
right, man.
Jesse, for being my first quarantine.
It was a pleasure.
Talk. Yeah. So
definitely quarantine. Sorry for spewing everything.
No, it's all right. Just let it all out. Let it all out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, until next time, I will see y'all later.